Welcome, everyone, to this conversation with Kiley Reid, who has won considerable acclaim for her debut novel, Such a Fun Age, first published in the United States in 2019 and then in the UK in 2020, and in Norway this year with the title Litt av en tid, which kind of misses the pun, but I guess it's all right. The novel has been longlisted for the Booker Prize and was generally well received by critics who praised the novel for its deft way of tackling complex questions about race and class in contemporary America, while at the same time managing to tell a compelling story. In our conversation today, we will discuss Kiley's novel, its conception, its ideas, and its reception. We will also discuss the state of American culture today and what it is like being a novelist in the age of the culture wars. Thank you, Kiley, for agreeing to talk to us this evening.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Great. Okay, so I read somewhere that you started writing this novel many years ago. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating the book and the path towards this publication?
I can. It was a few years ago. It was probably in 2014. I feel that there are many writers who marinate on an idea for a long time before they actually put pen to paper. And I definitely thought about writing this novel for a solid year before I actually started the process. And in the beginning, I knew that I wanted to have a very delicate and awkward dynamic between three people. In a lot of my favorite stories and movies and literature, there's an imbalance of three people that makes for a very tense read, which I really enjoy. And so I knew that that's what I wanted going in. So immediately I had a relationship between a young woman, her new boyfriend, and her employer. But what really took center stage and at the heart of this novel is a story with a young Black caretaker, a white mother, and the charge that the caretaker takes care of. And that became the heart of the novel, and exploring domestic work in the United States with a fraught history of Black women taking care of white children. So from there, I started thinking about the novel in New York City. I ended up moving to Arkansas for a year, and I completed it at graduate school at the University of Iowa.
So how does one go about pitching such a novel to the publisher in the United States?
That's a great question. I was at graduate school where they bring in agents maybe once a month to meet with you and hear about your projects. I wanted to meet all of them. I wanted to make as many connections as I could. And so I met with all of them, and that was very good practice of giving what they call an elevator pitch very quickly to the agents. So when my novel was completed, I knew that I wanted to bring on an agent to help me present it and take care of those big things like contracts and numbers that I'm not really too familiar with. So I sent a query letter, which is you telling about who you are, what your novel is about, but I made sure to include that I had taken this novel as far as I knew how, and I was interested in what the agent's vision of this book was. And so I sent about 16 letters out, and 8 agents came back saying that they would love to represent this book. And at that point, it kind of feels a little bit like dating, where you're having phone conversations with all of them and making sure you fit each other and you fit your communication styles. And some agents will come back saying, this is perfect the way it is. Some will say, I want to change everything. The agent that I went with was somewhere in the middle. She was very smart and quick, and I felt that we had a really great rapport. And so I signed on with her. And then she and I worked on the novel for 6 weeks together. The ending in the novel was the third ending that I wrote. We went over and over and over a lot of the spirit and ideas of this book to the point where we felt like it was strongest. And then we put it on submission to different publishing houses. And then that's when the book is at auction and different publishing houses offer or don't. Yes, so that's what happened.
Wow. Okay, so it's very different from the Norwegian situation, I'll say. But would you say that the novel was very different in its complete form from what it was like when you first sent it to the agent? Or
That's a great question.
Just the ending?
Just the ending took the biggest change. Most of my agent's notes were concerning, this person, their character kind of floats out of the scene. Let's bring them back a little bit more. They basically go through and do handwritten notes to you. But I think something that's important to remember is that it's still my work and I'm allowed to say yes or no. When I was in graduate school, I had workshopped the novel in the novel writing workshop with Paul Harding, author of Tinkers. He's really wonderful. And I probably used 80% of the notes given to me. I think a huge part of the writing process is editing. And so I would say that the book was fairly complete when I turned it in, but we did do minor fixes and rewrote the ending a few times.
But you were in a creative writing class while writing the novel, right? So you had time.
Yeah. I had a lot of, that was the biggest asset. I only had one part-time job instead of 3, which is what I usually did when I was writing.
So I wanted to go a little bit back to what you said about your initial idea, because that was a kind of a ménage à trois, but then you went on to describe this black caretaker and the history of that kind of situation in the United States. So I wanted to ask you whether that theme of the racial issue was something that you wanted to tell immediately when you had the idea, or whether that was something that came later?
That very much came later. I am a big believer that, well, first of all, I'm fairly obsessed with a really well-crafted plot and storytelling. And I believe, and I teach my students this as well, that you cannot theme your way into a plot. You cannot start saying, I'm going to talk about how racism is bad. Yeah. I think, well, okay, it still exists. You have to, start with characters and people. Tayari Jones talks about not writing about problems people, but writing about people's problems and making it very intimate. So no, I did not set out to tell white people how to act or write about racism. I really wanted a page-turning story that focused on one Black woman and her, experience being a domestic care worker.
Okay, so that brings me to the next question. What kind of not movies? What kind of books do you like to read, and what books would you say were the most influential in your own writing?
I might even be able to point out one. I have one on my shelf that was very, very influential. So when I had the plot of my book down, I started exploring more transactional relationships, and reading nonfiction is very, very important for my process. So my husband gifted me this book here, Uneasy Street: Anxieties of Affluence, where a sociologist interviewed 50 very wealthy families in New York City about their wealth and anxieties of being a liberal, wealthy person. I was so inspired by the interviews, by the mental gymnastics of being a good person with wealth. And so going to the experts was very, very influential for me. Another book that I read was Leila Slimani's The Perfect Nanny, which is not the proper name, the Moroccan name, but it was wonderful. I also love a book that starts with a murder, and that's one for sure. So that one was a great help. And there was another one. What was it? So many documentaries about wealth, domestic care workers. There's a short story by Gish Jen called Who's Irish that was really hitting a lot of the notes that I wanted. Domestic work is something that I think is really rich in literature, so there was a lot to choose from.
Okay, so that would be the research for this novel, but what about if you want to just relax and not think about your own writing, just read? What would you read then?
James Baldwin is a big go-to for me. I'm currently reading Another Country by James Baldwin, and it's just beautiful. Yeah. Giovanni's Room was a really big favorite of mine. I love Donna Tartt as well. It just feels like literary, like soul food almost. She's a big favorite of mine. I'm currently reading Convenience Store Woman, which I'm really enjoying. Anything about the science of the mundane really reminds me. I loved The Factory by Hiroko Oyamada as well. And I also love playwright Annie Baker and her work, The Flick and John. Those are where I go when I just want to hang out.
Yeah, I haven't read all of them myself, but I remember reading Donna Tartt's Secret History, and that's quite the page turner.
Yes, quite the debut for her.
Yeah, and it took her long to follow it up also, as far as I can recall. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I wanted to tell the audience a little bit about the plot of your novel, Such a Fun Age, which is a pun, I guess. It's both something that you would say about the 3-year-old, and it's an ironic take on the situation, I guess, today in America, contemporary America, and also maybe an ironic take on Emira Tucker's situation as a 25-year-old, not knowing what to do with her life.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so those three was kind of meanings where I sort of caught on to. Okay, Emira Tucker is a 25-year-old black woman working part-time as a babysitter, and she gets a call one evening from her white employers, and they have this kind of emergency situation, and they want Emira to look after their toddler, Briar, for a while. And Emira comes, even though she's at the party and is dressed accordingly, and having also had a couple of drinks. And she takes this white child with her to a nearby supermarket and is accosted by a security guard and another customer, as far as I can recall, accusing her of having kidnapped the child. So the situation is eventually resolved after Emira calls her employer, Mr. Chamberlain, who comes to the rescue. This scene at the supermarket is filmed by another customer called Kelly Copeland, a white man who later starts to date Emira, and he wants her to post the video online in order to shame or punish the white security guard. Emira resists this offer, and the novel goes on to explore her relationship to two older white people, supposedly well-meaning liberals, in her life, Alix Chamberlain and Kelly Copeland. As it turns out, this is a kind of a little spoiler, but I think I have to tell it, otherwise it's going to be hard to discuss it. As it turns out, they are both more or less using Emira as a means of virtue signaling, maybe, that's at least an interpretation. And it also turns out that they have unresolved issues between them, having dated in high school, I guess, and where Kelly dumped Alix in a way that Alix thinks was extremely hurtful and which ruined her reputation and destroyed the rest of her high school life. So while being in a way tugged back and forth between these two people, Emira doesn't know what to do with her life, what she will do for work, other than knowing that she is really good at what she does, that is taking care of a child. And that takes me to the first question, which is kind of a comment. And that is that your depictions of the practicalities of babysitting is extremely believable and realistic. And I say this as a father of young children myself. How did you go about researching that?
That's wonderful to hear. So I was a nanny for 6 years. And before that, I've been babysitting since I was 10, as I think many women find themselves, people assume that you'll be a wonderful caregiver often if you're a woman. This is not a novel about me, but I definitely took the experience of being in someone else's home, of the vernacular of a toddler, of the little tiny minutia of every day, of finding their socks in your bag and explaining things in a certain way. There's a certain smell and feel and spirit of taking care of a very little unstructured structured person. And so I loved being a caretaker, but I also didn't have healthcare. In the United States, it's something that only comes with certain jobs, despite the fact that being a caretaker is a very difficult position. And so while Emira and I are very different, I wanted her to carry that anxiety of not having a real job while she's doing very difficult work. I remember I also worked at a children's birthday party studio for 4 years. And so I was sometimes doing 6 birthday parties a week. And I learned how to very quickly cut an ice cream cake, which is not easy. And I could do the whole thing in 3 minutes. That being said, every time I went to go cut this cake very quickly, I had to center myself and say, you can't go too quickly, because if you cut yourself, you will be out of thousands of dollars. And that would have shifted the entire course of my life. And I think that anxiety affects everything. It affects your performance. It affects, what you think you can do. It affects your comfortability with a child or the job that you hang on to, even though you don't see yourself in it for a long time. So with Emira, I really wanted to explore a young woman who's a fantastic caregiver, but is at this turning point as she turns 26, where she wants to be able to do fun things with her girlfriends and not have that anxiety, but she can't do that while doing this job that she loves. So she's definitely at a very complicated place.
Yeah, it sounds definitely sounds brutal. But what I wanted to follow up with was that your depiction of Briar is one of the things actually that impressed me the most with your novel, because one thing is writing a believable child chatter. Another thing is to represent a child who is both believable as a child and who has a distinct personality, which I think Briar definitely has. And it's very important to the novel that you get away with that, because you have to make the reader believe that Emira and Briar has a special relationship, and that is only believable because Briar is such a charming child, I guess.
Thank you.
So how did you? Can you talk a little bit about your work with creating Briar?
Absolutely. First of all, also, you say everyone's name perfectly better than most Americans do, so I really appreciate that. And yes, so much went into shaping Briar. I feel that in literature, children are often used as a plot device, and they're a little bit too precious, and they'll say the perfect thing, or they'll reveal a secret at the perfect time, and they almost seem like a bit angelic in this either angelic or extremely naughty. And I didn't feel that was accurate for how toddlers are. When I was a nanny, I was so surprised at how adult-like many toddlers are and how serious they can be, even though they love having fun. But some of them have a lot of anxiety and like Briar, a bit of an existential crisis. And so I took a lot of experience that I had from nannying, but what really helps me is doing interviews. So I interviewed a lot of parents and spent a lot of time with mothers and children to make sure I was getting those tones correctly. Another thing I wanted to do with Briar is, I would ask mothers, what's the funniest thing your child has ever said? Yeah. And a lot of the answers that mothers would give me would be children repeating adult speak. It would be children saying, "Oh, mommy, I hate President Trump." Yeah. And I didn't like that because it's not the child using their intelligence. It's just them repeating something that the adult says, when children are very funny on their own. So I wanted to make sure that everything Briar was saying was something that she realized about the world, that she wasn't repeating anybody, that she was telling everyone what she thought about the world around her. So that was really important for her character. I just wanted her to be so honest and odd and nervous, but also establish that there's no ego between her and Emira. She doesn't care that Amira's broke and doesn't have social media, and Amira's very patient with her. So they meet each other at this really special place where their bond is really, really tender.
Yeah, I was interested to hear that you actually did a lot of interviews in order to write your novels. I wonder how many Norwegian novelists would do that, and that's just an aside. I think maybe a Norwegian novelist could learn something from that.
I have to ask, how old are your little ones?
7 and 6, so it's quite rough.
Right.
Okay, so moving on to the theme of race and racial tensions, how would you yourself describe the racial issue that you explore with each of these two relationships between Alix and Emira on the one hand, and Alix and Kiley on the other?
Of course. So I'll start with Alix and Emira. Alix hires Emira to be their caretaker. And then she realizes, I don't know this person at all. I don't know if she's happy working here. And I think that that's the surface one. What's deeper is that Alix is one of the many women in the United States who wants to have a successful job and successful work as a parent. And so they rely on the work of women of color to make sure that that can happen. And so she tries to adjust to that uncomfortability by making Emira her friend. What happens there is she denies the employer-employee relationship. There are things that you do with friends that you would not do with employers. I would never give my husband paid vacation days. I would never, make sure that he leaves at a certain time. So Alix crosses those boundaries and doesn't give Emira the employee rate she needs, but instead she gives her bottles of wine and attention. She wants to make herself feel a little bit better that Emira's happy while she's being exploited. So I think that Alix is not the only one in this position. And Alix also, she moves to Philadelphia and her husband kind of says, see you later, figure out the childcare. And Alix is a character who finds herself really lonely and in a position of power that she doesn't know how to contend with. And she's also coming off of hundreds of years of, domestic workers being mistreated and not giving the rights that they deserve. So that's Alix and Emira. Kiley and Emira, they really do like each other. They gravitate towards each other very naturally, and they get intimate very quickly, and Emira and him are having fun. That being said, Kiley is getting something a little bit different than Emira is getting from the relationship. I really wanted the reader to date Kiley with Emira and figure out what he was about. And a lot of the times he nails it. He's really fun. He likes her. They have a good time. But sometimes she has this moment where she wonders, when you tell the story of how we met, are you saving me? Are you getting a little bit too much out of that? And where do we stand in terms of what I'm getting from you and what you're getting from me? Kiley really pushes Emira to share this viral video, or he wants it to be viral, and she doesn't want that. She doesn't want her face to be on the internet, and he's kind of not hearing her. But I think most importantly is Alix and Kiley are both doing these moves that are more substance than actual impact. What would help Emira the most is financial stability and quality healthcare. But Alix and Kiley's, their moves are to say the perfect thing to make her like them, which really doesn't affect her her day-to-day life as much as they would like to believe it did.
Yeah, and so what I really liked about that scene at the supermarket was that when she sort of, what she got out of it wasn't, oh my God, I've been treated in a racist way. It's more like, oh my God, I don't have a real job. That's her main concern.
It is. She's a complete victim in this way that the world she lives in has told her that it's your fault that you don't have the things that your friends have. She's unable to look at the fact that her friend's father pays for her rent, or her other girlfriend has always known what she wants to do. And she takes her status as her fault when really she's been born into these broken systems that really keep poor people poor.
And what I wanted to follow up on also is that, so what you describe now, I think, is a very astute, critical analysis of the work relationship. And it's definitely something that I noticed. But also there is this intensity of Alix's attraction towards Emira, which is somehow transcends this thing. It's like, it's like she's really obsessed. It's like a crush. I think it's in the novel as well, that it's sort of like a crush. Would you comment on that?
Yes, that's a good memory. Yes, it is almost like a crush. Alix is really attracted to Emira's blasé attitude. I think this happens sometimes when someone is a little bit quiet. We want their attention and we want their approval. I will say, I was a receptionist for 3 years while I was trying to write. And something that I often noticed from my coworkers is them really wanting my approval of them as a person. Yeah. Because if the lowest rung person likes you, that must mean that you're a good person too. And I think that that's a common move for the liberal elite to make sure that, we're the same. I remember when I was a receptionist, so many people would introduce me to their friends or clients and say, this is Kiley. She's the boss around here. She's the queen. She runs this place. I didn't run anything. That was them trying to normalize our relationship. So I was hearing all the time, Kiley's the boss. She's amazing. She's wonderful. And then when I asked for a raise, oh no, we're not the same. Yeah. You can't get paid the same. That's not something that we're doing. So I think it's very common, but I would say Alix has a big crush on Emira.
Yeah, and in addition to what you were saying now, I would also say that Emira has this kind of individuality. It's sort of, she's very, she keeps her distance in a way that I think maybe signals to Alix that she doesn't want to get moved or dragged into this kind of world that Alix is living in, which is very much influenced by these female friends of her who stayed on in New York while she went to Philadelphia, I guess it was. Yeah.
Yes.
And Emira is kind of, she kind of represents what Alix does not have the courage to do, to just say no to this. I want to figure out, who I am and what I want to do with my life.
That's absolutely correct. Alix moves to Philadelphia and doesn't have her busyness, and she says, well, I don't have my job anymore, so who am I? I'm lost without my job. And then there's Emira, who has this natural rejection to careerism. She doesn't need to have this upward mobility in the same way that Alix does. And you're right, Emira does put up a lot of boundaries in her work life. In graduate school, I studied with Ayanna Mathis, who's brilliant and wonderful, and we talked a lot about magical objects in literature. And so there's a few here in ways that Emira is protecting herself. She puts on another shirt every day. And of course, it's, she doesn't want to get messy, but it's also there's the real me, and then there's me with this shirt on, and we have a boundary there. She also never calls Alix Alix. She calls her Mrs. Chamberlain. She wants to put another boundary with their language, but Alix keeps trying to break down all of those boundaries. I also think that Emira wants to have boundaries because I know from experience, it's very hard to not fall in love with a little person that you're taking care of every day. It's very difficult to not feel like you owe them something and you want to be with them. It's hard not to fall in love with them. Emira knows that this job isn't sustainable for the rest of her life. And so I feel her trying to back away from being too in love with this little girl so that she can one day move on.
Yeah. But she does love Briar, right? Yeah.
She does.
Yeah. So this whole issue about white liberal anxiety, because what I wanted to just say is that you don't really explore the real. You don't explore the tension between like a Trump supporter and a black caretaker. You explore, within the sort of liberal culture, anti-racist, supposedly anti-racist culture, and you explore that kind of relationship. How would you describe this kind of dynamic with this white anxiety?
What I've seen as a caretaker and what I've seen in my research is that the anxiety stems from, a want to have the world look a certain way, but also have the world remain how it is now. I think an example is I have a girlfriend who was telling me, she's white, and she was telling me how diverse her office is and how diverse her hiring has been. And I said, oh, that's wonderful. How many people of color have you hired? And she said, well, I've never not hired a woman. So what happens is that belief of progression and feminism and liberalness, it doesn't work the way it should. Equality should start at the bottom for the people who need it most and work its way up. But a lot of what happens with liberal good intentions is that it takes care of everyone on the top rung and says, well, I got all of my friends' jobs, so I did the thing, and now we can move on. And I think that a lot of people don't understand that to achieve equality, and if you want to give power to people who don't have it, you might have to give up some of your power and your comfort. So I think that what happens with a lot of liberal elites is a rejection of living their lives any differently than they're doing it. Instead, it's making it look different so that they can feel good about what they've done.
Exactly. This character of Kelly Copeland, he is at the end of the novel, or towards the end of the novel, he is accused by Alix of fetishizing black people by dating only black girls and by befriending black athletes in high school. How widespread is this phenomenon? Is it true? Is it true? Is the accusation true, first of all? And how widespread would you say this phenomenon is in the United States?
That's a great question. Something that I wanted to do with this novel, I write in third person close, so you're with that person, whoever section it is. There are moments such as these where Alix accuses people of fetishization. She doesn't really know exactly what that means, but she's heard it and it feels good in the moment, and she wants to use that. So to Alix, it's true. But do I think, that Kelly couldn't meet a black woman and fall in love with her and really support her and love her? Yes, I think that that's possible as well. I do think that Alix is accusing Kelly of something that she's also guilty of. I think that she's very excited to, at the idea of being close with her black babysitter and being more like a friend. So I don't know how common that is. I'm married, thank the Lord, so I don't have to figure out how common that is. But I think that, fetishization is real, but it also stems from very big issues of white supremacy and like we were saying before, wanting to see black people, but not wanting to achieve actual equality.
So it seems to me that Kelly is actually taking this accusation seriously. Well, it's like, oh my God, have you even heard about this phenomenon? Is his first reaction that Alix would know about this this accusation at all? And so it seems he's kind of aware of it and that he's kind of embarrassed about it. But, he continues. You do write that ending where he has another black girlfriend and uses the exact same humorous language towards her, calling her Miss. All right, Miss?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great point. And yes, Kelly definitely has a type. How harmful that is, I don't really explore. But what I think is most important with the type of person that he's with, and what Emira catches on to as well, is that Kelly often dates black women, but I think what's more important than that is the fact that he dates black women who are in the same income bracket that he's in. He does not really meet Emira where she's at, and he finds himself, making mistakes, saying, "Oh, you should do this job, or maybe you can do this." And I think more than anything, their class differences would be the thing to tear them apart.
Yeah, and this brings us to the issue of class. Obviously, we've talked about that already, and your novel very much alerts us to the fact that you can't really discuss racial issues without discussing class issues. And so this whole, which the thing about the novel that kind of disturbed me was this relationship between these friends of Alix's. Because that that kind of, so what they do is that they want to be kind of capitalist badasses and feminists in a way, so they merge an honorable political cause, in this case feminism, with a for-profit entrepreneurism, which they kind of try to exploit the political struggle in order to cash in on it, and they have this sort of I feel a little bit of a misguided empowerment of
You're
women.
describing American economy perfectly.
So,
Yeah.
so everything has to be, if you do something, it's like if you can knit or if you can do anything, you have to create a blog or you have to create a brand, you have to have a hashtag and, start business calling agents. It makes me kind of stressed out.
It's very stressful to commodify your interest as a human being, and it's a very common American cultural thing of, oh, you do this, oh, you should sell it. How can you make this thing good is to sell it somewhere, and that will be its goodness. Instead of just having a practice of learning a new skill or doing something that you really enjoy. Their minds are geared towards a profit. And I think that they share that with a lot of Americans, that in order for something to be worthwhile, it has to upwardly move them somewhere financially or socially. It has to have some kind of meaning more than just living your life and enjoying something.
Yeah, so her claim to fame, Alix's claim to fame, is that she breastfeeds her child while doing a podium discussion on some political issue. Let her speak is the slogan, that she creates. Yeah, but also, and also this social pressure that they have, because so Manhattan is basically where everything that matters happen, and then she moves out and she moves to Philly. It was kind of surprising for me that it's like kind of Philly is kind of like this rural village where nothing really matters, but that's how it's like to New Yorkers, obviously, or apparently, and then and also she Alix then, when she moves to Philadelphia, she starts to put on weight. She kind of relaxes a little bit, and she's not that alert to her career and the development of her career, and so she is pressured. So is this a widespread phenomenon as well?
Well, I'll say this. I live in Philadelphia. It's wonderful. And I was really excited to portray Philadelphia through the eyes of Alix, who believes it's lesser than, and someone like Emira, who, this is where she grew up. And this is an exciting city for her to learn how to be an adult. And so there are definitely people. I lived in New York for 9 years. And there's definitely people who believe that moving outside of New York City means that you failed. It means that what you do doesn't matter as much as it did in New York City, and that, if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. But New York is an island for the rich. It's, I don't think that it's a failure to decide that you don't want to pay $2,000 for a one-bedroom apartment, especially if you have a family. So Alix, she thought that Philadelphia was something that she wanted, and she realizes when she gets there, she's lonely and she doesn't really want to put in the work to make sure that doesn't happen. I definitely think that does happen. The pandemic has brought a lot of New Yorkers to Philadelphia, which is strange, but it's still a wonderful city, and I love living here.
But what about this kind of, when she starts to put on weight, Alix starts to put on weight, it's kind of her girlfriends want to support her by basically bullying her into losing weight. I mean, come on.
They're wild. At the same time, okay, I'll say two things about this. They're doing to Alix what they often do towards politics. Instead of asking how she is and where her mental state is, they want to make her look the same, as if her looking the same will make her feel the same, when really they should probably check on her well-being first. That being said, I have to be honest and say I babysat I counted the other day, probably 60 families. And Alix and her friends, I would babysit for them in a heartbeat more than a lot of women who are obsessed with their image and money and all of those things. Alix, even at her worst, and she does a lot of mistakes, but she respects Emira's finances. And unfortunately, I can't say that that's the same for most women that are, hired help. Alix does respect Emira's time and her finances, but then she gets a little creepy as well.
Yeah, so that brings me to this question about the moral character of Alix and Kiley, because I definitely felt while reading the novel that Alix wasn't such a bad person after all, and then she does stuff that you think maybe she is actually evil, because I think I have to do the spoiler in order to discuss. Okay, so what she does is that she goes into her laptop or her computer where Emira has just been on her Gmail, I guess, and she finds this video of the scene in the supermarket. And then she goes together with her entourage, and they kind of decide together that they should post this video online in order somehow to further Emira's career, because they think in terms of what I said earlier, that if you have something like that that will put you in the spotlight, like Alix breastfeeding her child in the podium, then you should capitalize on it immediately. And that's what she does. And that just seems like such a just nasty thing to do, without asking. So then you kind of at the end of the novel feel that Alix was, after all, a bad person.
You really sit with Alix as she starts at the top of her career, and as she falls from grace, her grasping for control again gets incredibly nasty. And I do think that, but on one end, I'm with you in that Alix, she, in many ways, isn't this evil person because first of all, I just want to save all of my energy for the systems that she's put in. I think she's very much a product of that. That being said, I don't think that her behavior at the end of the novel is that much different from her normal life, in that she has this brand that is about women asking questions and sticking up for themselves and getting what they want. Meanwhile, her 3-year-old does that all the time, and it drives her bananas. She cannot handle it. I think that she's a woman who, when she loses control, she makes really bad decisions and doesn't understand that the rules that her business is based on, they only apply to her when it makes her comfortable. She makes a lot of terrible decisions with good intentions behind it. And I wanted to give her the room to do that. Unfortunately, I've heard of a lot worse for many domestic caregivers, especially during COVID.
Yeah, and I honestly wanted her to succeed in getting closer to Emira, at parts of the novel. I just, I sympathized with her a little bit, because, she really seemed to want the best for Emira, but by dragging her into this whirlwind of the capitalist whirlwind, I guess, and that Emira doesn't want, and so, and then in the end, I guess Kiley is kind of, because I thought the entire time that Kiley had probably betrayed Alix in high school. It turns out in the end that he hasn't really betrayed her. He just broke up with her. So he is kind of saved a little bit, but Emira doesn't loses interest, while he is actually also innocent of what her friends, Emira's friends, accuse him of. So he hasn't really done anything wrong at the end, but he is still sort of tainted. I don't know.
I like ending, short stories and novels with the characters in a gray space where you think, if they met again in 2 years, they might be okay. Yeah. There might be a place for Kiley to say, I was probably a little wrong, and I probably, said a lot of the wrong things, and I should have listened to you more. Or maybe Emira feels that she couldn't give herself fully to a relationship while she felt so insecure about where she was with her career, and she was balancing those things. And I think with both Kiley and Alix, it's easy to imagine a world where they all got along and it was okay. There were many mothers that I still talk to now who were maybe a little bit crazy, but I'll help their kids with their homework whenever we need, because we had a bond with all of those hours spent. And so I like ending a bit in that gray area. But I do think Kiley has a lot to learn as well.
Yeah, but did you, as you wrote him, did you kind of sympathize with him sometimes, or did you like him?
It's so trite to say. I like all of my characters. I think Kiley really likes Emira, and what he gives her throughout the novel is something that she's not getting from her friends. He doesn't really harp on her about her job or doing anything else. He's kind of living with her in the moment. And he's cute and she's attracted to him. And sometimes when you're 25, that's really all you need. So I do like all of my characters, but I don't necessarily think that they should date each other all the time.
Okay. So the theme that you brought up just now was the theme of parenting, which is also kind of, because that is maybe one of the most serious accusations that Emira makes towards Alix, and that is, you should start paying attention to your kid.
Right. When I quit a job 5 years ago or so, and someone said something to me that I really took to heart. I don't know if in Norway you do exit interviews where they ask you, your experience and what you took from the job or why you're quitting, but they do that here. And something that a friend said to me was, when you're quitting a job, have one reason that you're leaving. Don't say, and then you did this, and then this wasn't fair, and I didn't like this. Don't list all of the reasons. Focus on one thing to really leave them with. And that's something that I believe is true. I think it's really powerful, and it's something that I implement into my classes. In that moment, so many people say, I wanted Emira to go off on her. I wanted her to hand it to her. I wanted her to say this and this and this. Emira is a very thoughtful communicator, and she thinks, what can I leave this woman with that will hopefully change her and her daughter's life for the better? And she tells her, listen, your daughter is the way she is. You have to act like you like her, because she's going to find out. And unfortunately, with all the families that I babysat for, it was so easy to see that there's a favorite a lot of the time. And sometimes, it's conditional and seasonal because that child is going through something and that happens. But often when I was hired, it was to take the least favorite child out so the family could do whatever they wanted to do. And so Emira is aware of that, and she cares about this little girl, and she tries to change her life in the last 5 minutes that she's working for her.
Yeah, so I was talking to Bret Easton Ellis, who was, by the way, a friend of Donna Tartt's, and he was explaining this because he had some bad experiences with his parents, and he wrote about that, so I asked about it. And because I was kind of surprised of how much the American, especially affluent American parents, would want their kids to participate in. It's like they're doing this. Every day it's something, and so Brett told me that they want a return on their investment, which I thought
true. It's absolutely true. It's not, oh, my child loves ballet, even though she's terrible at it. It's we have to find something that they will give a return on investment, and we're going to, our way of loving our child is building up their resume, because so they can grow in the same ways, for sure.
So they actually start worrying about the child's career, educational career, at the age of like 4 or 5?
I would say younger. There's a wonderful documentary called Nursery University, and it's about elite parents in Manhattan trying to get their children into the best preschool. And, I babysat children who were going to kindergartens for $50,000 a year for kindergarten. I don't know how many crayons you can buy with that. It's wild. But yeah, there has to be a return on investment for sure.
So how do these kids turn out? How do they react to this? Are they getting, to be those brilliant people? Are they having nervous breakdowns, or what's going on?
Unfortunately, I think that a common thing in America is you don't really have to be brilliant to be president or anything, but you have.
Well, we noticed that over here as well. That's not a requirement.
No, but you have those connections. And you have that pedigree that people think, oh, you must be genius if you went to this school, when that person may not have a ton of skill or insight or creativity.
Yeah. Okay, so we are nearing sort of the end. So I'll skip my. Well, I wanted to ask you one thing though. This gaffe that Mr. Chamberlain does on the air. While
yes.
He says something like this black girl dating was it a white girl?
It's a young white girl accepting a prom date from a young black boy, and upon seeing this, Peter says, "Ooh, I hope he asked her father first."
Yeah. Okay. So he's and he experiences kind of a backlash for that, but it's not like the novel is really keen on exploring that so much. So I was just wanted to ask you, would you regard that as a kind of sort of halfway innocent gaffe, or would you be harsher on Peter and saying that this is what he really thinks?
I think that moment, I think if Peter is saying that in that moment, I can't imagine that he doesn't also think things in real life. So that goes away, that people kind of forget about that a little bit because he gets off the hook, but I can't imagine that what he thinks in everyday life is extremely, equal. So he's not someone that I would date or marry, but as far as, what should happen to him at work, I'm not too certain. The thing about these tiny little, moments is the important part is when you zoom out, it's how people are treated in real life. I remember when I was a nanny, I went to this apartment all the time. And I remember anytime someone would see me in the elevator, they would say, "Oh, you must be a nanny." Yeah. What if I lived there? Yeah. What if I wanted to live there? What if I was dating someone who lived there? So it's not the fact that they said that, it's what it means in a bigger context for my life, if they were on the co-op board or whatever it means. And so I think the same goes with Peter. It's not so much what he said, but what that means for Black Americans trying to date white people. So I think that's where it is. Yeah.
So it's not so innocent.
No, it never is. I do have a question for you, if that's okay. This has been a really, really lovely conversation. And it seems like the description of the liberal white elite here in the States wasn't that foreign to you. Is that something that Norway sees as well?
Yeah, I guess a little bit, but I also lived a little bit in the United States, so I do recognize it more from my American experience. But this is a long conversation. The difference between, white liberals in Norway and white liberals in the United States is a long conversation. But let me just put it this way. It seems a lot more similar than it really is. So initially, it seems that we're almost the same when I went to dinner parties. And then suddenly I realized that, something's amiss. I don't really understand what's going on. I don't understand why they're saying this. And, so there is a gap. But what that gap is, I can't really tell you. But
I understand.
But we could have explored it, and if we had the time. But we have to stick to your book now. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the reception of it. So you've been getting positive reviews, mostly as far as I can tell, even in Norway. I read a couple of reviews earlier today, Norwegian reviews. So I assume that you're happy about that.
Yes. Yes. Yes, I am.
Yeah. So, but was there something about what they wrote, what the reviewers, the critics wrote about your novel that surprised you, annoyed you, that you didn't, agree with?
This is the question that every author wants to be asked. That's wonderful. So for the most part, it was lovely to hear that the story resonated with readers. I really enjoy a smart, accessible page turner read. So when people found themselves reading it till 2 a.m, that's an absolute joy to me. Sometimes, people will say, I read this book in a day, and I want to say, slow down. It took me 3.5 years, but I love that there is that propensity there. At the same time, for the 2020 was a very interesting year with Black Lives Matter making a reappearance because of very tragic murders that, where justice was not achieved. So what happens often is that readers feel uncomfortable with the current climate and they say, what do I do? And where it's America, consume Black art and all will be well. So I can't judge what brings people to my novel, but unfortunately some reviews will focus on the fact that my book is talking about race at all as the all end all. When really, I'm an author who's obsessed with storytelling and I want my story to work on multiple dimensions. And someone buying my book doesn't, reset their mind or anyone else's mind. So I don't love when my book is used as a pedagogical tool of any kind, because that's not how I wrote it. That being said, it's wonderful to connect with readers. I got to go on book tour for 4 weeks, and some people on tour would tell me, I've never heard Black women talk like me and my friends. And hearing that and seeing it in a novel was really special. So I'm glad to have done that.
So, but are you now saying that praising the novel could be that kind of virtue signaling that you thematize in the novel?
From the very beginning, I wanted the novel to have a bit of a meta, effect. Yeah. I feel that if Alix read this novel, she would love it.
Yeah.
So a little bit, yeah.
Okay, so was there something about I guess you got a little bit of a negative review in was it the New York Review of Books?
I don't remember. I try to forget them.
Her name was Lauren Christensen or something.
I don't remember.
But what she took issue with, and I wanted to ask you, because since I feel that we have a good report, I dare to ask you about the negative criticism, even though I know that authors don't like it. But this criticism that your plot hinges on 2 coincidences. One coincidence is that Kiley used to date Alix,
right.
which Emira doesn't know. And the other one is that the letters that Alix put in the locker box of Kiley's locker,
right,
ran through his locker and down to this other guy's locker who crashed her party. Right. So what do you think about that? So I guess she's saying something like, okay, that's maybe a little bit too much with those 2 coincidences.
When I look at art, it's so interesting because receivers of art, their tolerance for coincidence, depending on the medium, goes up and down. When you watch Game of Thrones, there's a ton of coincidences. When you see a soap opera, there's a lot of coincidences too. But when you, read certain literary novels, this person knew this person. So unfortunately, that didn't work for her, and that's totally fine. I love when novels are a bit soapy. That's my preference. And so if I could pick who's reviewing my book, it's someone who likes storytelling and likes the feeling of being pulled along a little bit. It's been so interesting because, as soon as people have seen, it's a Reese Witherspoon book, they have a very interesting reaction where a lot of people who leave reviews on Instagram or whatever say, I'm not usually a book club person. This isn't my type. I saw this book cover and I usually go for more serious things, but I really liked it. So I feel that there's this strange place where readers want to feel very smart and literary and point out those plotty coincidence type things.
Yeah.
I'm in the middle, and a coincidence doesn't bother me. But honestly, if a coincidence bothers someone, that's fine. That's not too bad of a comment.
Okay. So did you feel that your novel contributed to a discussion about race and class that you felt proud of having initiated?
What a good question. It's never my I don't write novels to start conversations about race. I just don't. I'm obsessed with storytelling. I want my writing to get better and better. That's why I went to graduate school. If I was going to want to start a conversation about race, I would write a nonfiction book about race. That being said, I do think that you can learn something from a novel and gather new thoughts and see things in a new way. But you'll never catch me wanting to start a conversation. I just want someone to not sleep at night because they're reading my book.
Okay, so we're out of time, but I wanted to ask you one question because you mentioned that Reese Witherspoon thing. So what is that? Like Reese Witherspoon reads your book and then you get a sticker on it, and how does that work?
Reese Witherspoon picks one book a month, and she supports it as her select pick. And honestly, it was a joy because at so many readings, people would say to me, "Hey, I haven't read a book in a year, but I trust Reese Witherspoon, and she told me to read this book, so I read this book." So the fact that she's like putting up female authors is really wonderful. I was thrilled. I think she's great. So
okay. I think we'll have to end now.
Okay. This has been really delightful for me too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for a great conversation, and thank you for agreeing to talk with us this evening.
Absolutely. I so wish it was in person. Norway is probably in my top 3 places to visit. I would love to be there, but maybe next year.
Well, after the pandemic is over, kind of over, we'll definitely try to arrange it. Okay, so and thank you to the audience, and good night.
Thank you so much.